Welcome to Relaxing Historian Journey channel. Tonight we step quietly into a medieval winter evening, a night where children shiver without blankets or fire and the cold feels alive, brushing across cheeks and slipping through woolen tunics. Imagine the smell of smoke, faintly lingering from a hearth that barely warms the room, mingling with the earthy scent of straw and cold stone outside. Frost glimmers softly on rooftops, and the wind whispers through the eaves, carrying secrets that are older than the towns themselves. Have you ever wondered how a child of 7 or 8 survived nights when the cold could make breath visible as it escaped from their lips? How they learned patience, resilience, and creativity simply to endure until morning. This is their world. Quiet, yet vivid, where each sensation carries meaning and every small warmth is treasured. You will move through these frozen space, feel the chill pressing at your skin, and discover the delicate routines that shaped medieval childhood. You might notice small details, like a sibling huddling close to share warmth, or a tiny hand rubbing a favourite wooden toy for comfort. The nights were long, and the world outside was harsh, but inside these stories, there is a rhythm, a careful adaptation to a season that demanded endurance. So, before you settle into the story, take a second to like the video and hit subscribe. And I would love to hear from you in the comments, where you are watching from and what time it is locally. Your presence is a gentle echo across centuries, reminding us that warmth is not only a physical sensation but a shared experience. Now, dim the lights as the room darkens around you. Picture the soft glow of a flickering hearth, its light barely reaching the corners of a small timber-framed home. The wooden beams overhead creak as cold air slips through the cracks, bringing the smell of the winter from outside. You feel a chill touch your ankles as you step closer to the straw mattress laid carefully in the corner, and you notice how each bundle of straw offers some comfort. Though rough against the skin, some nights there was no fire at all, only the residual warmth of bodies pressed together. Children learned quickly how to tuck themselves close to parents or siblings, curling into small, protective shapes. Historians still debate exactly how families balanced warmth with scarce fuel. Perhaps some relied more heavily on the body heat of children than on logs that were meant for cooking rather than comfort. You breathe in the faint aroma of damp wool and dry straw, a scent that is strangely reassuring, signalling a home even in the midst of winter's bite. Outside, the wind taps against wooden shutters, a rhythm almost musical, though sharper and colder than any lullaby. The towns are quiet, save for the distant howl of a dog or the faint clatter of boots on icy streets. Imagine yourself following a child as they take one last step outside to tend a small fire in the communal hearth or to fetch water from a frozen well. The cold bites at exposed hands, reddening knuckles, while feet pressed into simple leather shoes begin to grow numb. You notice how children move differently in winter, more carefully, as if the cold demands attention at every step. Some wore multiple layers of tunics, patched over time and slightly stiff from repeated washing, while others wrapped themselves in shawls or scraps of cloth, treasures passed from one generation to the next. Textiles were more than clothing. They were survival tools, insulating bodies against the chill. The house itself is alive with quiet energy. A younger child sighs, curling closer to an older sibling who is already half asleep. You hear the faint rasp of breathing, the soft shuffle of straw as bodies settle for the night. Perhaps a parent hums under their breath, a tune learned from long winters, a melody meant to calm not just children but their own weary thoughts. Each sound, each movement, is part of a carefully orchestrated nightly ritual. Some nights, cats or dogs pad softly between feet and walls, adding warmth and companionship, their presence as much a comfort as a blanket might be. You might imagine the soft purring vibrating through a small body, a rhythm both soothing and grounding. The temperature in these rooms could be harsh, dropping to near freezing, yet children adapted with remarkable ingenuity. You notice how they tuck hands beneath chins, press cheeks against wool, or wrap themselves in available scraps, making every inch of warmth count. Historians still argue whether some households encourage certain positions for children to preserve heat more efficiently, a practice lost to time yet hinted at in occasional sketches and records. These practices may seem minor, but to a child they are the difference between comfort and shivering through the night. You can almost feel the gentle tug of blankets that are not there, replaced instead by straw, body heat, and shared courage. In these homes, storytelling becomes a subtle warmth. A whispered tale about far-off lands or mischievous spirits can distract from the cold, making a child's imagination a blanket in itself. Perhaps someone recalls an event from the past winter, a slip on ice or a funny incident with the neighbour's cow, and laughter erupts quietly, muffled by thick wool and straw. Such small joys are precious, illuminating otherwise dark and chilly nights. As you imagine drifting deeper into the evening, you sense how the senses sharpen in cold, the smell of smoke, the faint tang of frost, the rough touch of clothing, the soft press of another's arm against yours all merge into an awareness of survival and intimacy. Each sensation teaches a lesson about resilience and adaptation, and even when discomfort is present, the human spirit finds a way to cultivate comfort, whether through companionship, ingenuity, or simple acceptance of the cold as an unchangeable companion. You might wonder about the foods eaten to encourage warmth from within. A thick porridge or a sip of weak ale could offer fleeting heat. The effect subtle but psychologically comforting. Some historians suggest that certain spices, though rare and expensive, were sometimes added to food to stimulate a warming sensation. Others argue that children often relied on plain, repetitive meals, and that any heat they gained internally was minimal. Yet the ritual of eating together contributed to a sense of security. You sense how these small acts, repeated night after night, reinforced not just survival, but the rhythm of life itself, a cadence attuned to the seasons. Outside, the frost continues to gather on rooftops, glinting softly in moonlight. You can almost hear the crunch of ice under the boots of passing villagers, the distant bleating of sheep, the soft moan of a timber wall contracting in the cold. Each sound is subtle, yet distinct, part of the soundtrack of a medieval winter night, and within these sounds, the quiet perseverance of children is woven, an unrecorded history that survives through imagination and careful reconstruction. Finally, as you settle deeper into this imagined room, the weight of cold seems to soften, the small comforts shared heat, familiar scents, whispers of stories, and gentle closeness form a fragile cocoon. You feel the contrast between harsh winter outside and the determined warmth inside, a testament to human adaptation and the quiet strength of children. This is their world, a blend of harsh reality and tender resilience, a place where every night is a negotiation with the cold and where survival depends on creativity, closeness, and small rituals passed down through generations. You breathe in slowly, letting the imagined warmth fill you, feeling a connection across centuries to those who face the same frost and learn to endure. You step into a medieval household and feel the immediacy of the space around you. The room is small, with low timber beams and walls darkened by centuries of smoke. Every surface holds a story, the uneven floorboards worn smooth in places where footsteps have passed for decades, the hearthstones blackened from constant fire, the shelves crowded with simple pottery and carved wooden utensils. The smell of smoke mingles with the earthy tang of stored grains, creating a scent that is both pungent and oddly comforting. You can hear the faint creak of wood as it shifts with the chill, a soft reminder that the house is alive, responding to the cold air pressing against it. The hearth is the heart of this home, though it rarely fills the room with warmth. Logs are precious, reserved for cooking, or short bursts of comfort rather than sustained heat. Children learn quickly where to stand or sit to catch even a sliver of warmth. You notice how they cluster near the fire, shoulders pressed together, sharing heat in a way that is instinctive yet essential. Historians still debate how medieval families allocated firewood and whether children were deliberately positioned for maximum warmth or simply moved wherever there was space. Either way, you sense that survival required ingenuity, awareness, and careful observation from a very young age. Around the room, simple furniture serves multiple purposes. A rough-hewn table doubles as a work surface for chores and lessons, while benches and stools are rearranged each evening to make space for sleeping. The smell of worn wood mixes with lingering aromas from the day's cooking watery stews, coarse bread, and the faint tang of fermented ale. You brush your hand over a coarse wool blanket folded neatly in a corner. It is scratchy, but it has been a comfort to many children over the years. Each fold carries the faint scent of repeated use and the subtle warmth of someone who has just lain upon it. Light is sparse. Flickering from a small hearth and an occasional candle, shadows dance across the walls, making the space feel larger than it is, yet at the same time accentuating the tightness of the room. You notice the sounds of domestic life, a parent chopping vegetables, a sibling's quiet cough, the low hum of conversation. Even these small noises provide reassurance, a background rhythm that tells children they are safe within the structure, even if the cold presses against the walls from outside. You feel the subtle vibration of wood underfoot as the house creaks and settles, reminding you of the long life of the building itself. The floor is strewn with rushes, their dried leaves offering a crude insulation against the cold stone or dirt beneath. Walking across it, your feet feel the uneven texture, each step producing a faint rustle. Children often learn to sleep on these rushes, sometimes layered with straw for added comfort. The texture is rough, but it provides a connection to the earth, a subtle grounding that can be oddly soothing. You can almost sense the warmth of many bodies pressing together here over time, the collective effort to transform discomfort into a shared form of protection. Every object in the household has a purpose beyond its immediate function. Cooking pots are heavy and blackened, evidence of repeated use over an open flame. Small wooden bowls and spoons bear the subtle stains of porridge and broth. You notice a few carved toys tucked into a corner, rough and simple, yet they represent a child's attempt to bring play and imagination into an otherwise harsh environment. Scholars still argue about the prevalence of such toys and whether they were common in every household or rare luxuries for a select few. Either possibility reflects how children shape their surroundings, adding warmth and personality where resources were limited. The walls of the home are adorned with little more than practical items, hooks for clothing, baskets for storage, and perhaps a small religious icon or charm intended to ward off illness or misfortune. You smell the faint aroma of dried herbs tucked into corners, perhaps sage or rosemary, meant to purify the air or provide a soothing scent in otherwise austere conditions. These small gestures show a desire not only for physical survival but for comfort, even in subtle and symbolic forms. You feel the quiet determination that threads through every part of the household, from the worn beams to the layered clothing of the children. You sense the rhythms of the evening. The household moves through familiar motions, the washing of hands, the final preparation of food, the careful stacking of firewood for a short night flame. Children are given small tasks, like feeding animals in the adjacent pen or checking water stored in barrels, and they perform these chores with a mix of obedience and learned self-reliance. The air is tinged with cold, yet movement generates fleeting warmth, a subtle dance of bodies within a constrained space. The repetitive actions, the shared labour, all contribute to a sense of order and stability. Even as the world outside grows darker and colder, sleep preparation is a ritual. Mats and rushes are arranged, blankets or scraps of cloth are distributed, and children position themselves to maximize shared heat. You hear the faint rustle of clothing as they adjust layers of wool or linen. Perhaps a parent hums softly, or a sibling whispers a comforting phrase. The room is quiet, but not silent, a careful balance that allows rest while maintaining the awareness necessary for survival. Every sound, every movement is intentional and meaningful, forming part of a nightly choreography that has been repeated countless times over generations. The air in the room carries subtle variations in temperature. Near the hearth, warmth radiates faintly, while corners farthest from the fire remain sharply cold. Children instinctively learn these gradients, moving closer to one another or to certain objects for comfort. The smell of damp wool and the faint tang of smoke linger, merging into a scent that is uniquely domestic and historically authentic. You might imagine brushing your hand against a sibling's sleeve, feeling the coarse fabric and shared warmth. A reminder that human contact can be as vital as fire itself. Outside, frost clings to the windows, glinting faintly under moonlight. The sounds of distant animals, the soft patter of feet across frozen paths, the occasional gust of wind all frame the quiet life within. You sense the contrast between the harsh, indifferent cold beyond the walls and the careful, communal efforts inside. Even in scarcity, there is intentionality where to place bodies, how to layer clothing, how to use limited fuel effectively. The structure of the household itself, the rhythms of work and rest, the careful allocation of warmth, all serve as strategies of survival honed over generations. In this space, you feel the intersection of comfort and discomfort, of warmth and cold, of human ingenuity and the demands of the environment. Every object, every action contributes to the delicate balance that allows children to endure the night. Historians still debate the extent to which families relied on shared heat versus clothing or sparse fires, but you sense that each element mattered, and each child learned to negotiate their own position within this ecosystem. The smell, the sounds, the textures, the subtle motion all combine into a tactile understanding of medieval life that is intimate, immediate, and immersive. As night deepens, the household gradually quiets. Children lie down on rushes, bodies pressed together. Parents monitor the hearth one last time before settling near their children. You feel the subtle ebb and flow of warmth, the gentle sighs of those around you, and the comforting rhythm of shared survival. The house itself seems to breathe, creaking and shifting, a living container of experience, history, and quiet resilience. Outside, the moon traces patterns on frost-covered rooftops, illuminating the sleeping village with a soft, silvery glow. Inside, warmth persists in small pockets, in shared proximity, in the subtle textures of straw and cloth. You feel yourself slipping into a sense of understanding that survival in the medieval household was as much about community, awareness, and adaptation as it was about firewood or blankets. Every creak, every breath, every touch carries significance, teaching lessons about endurance and intimacy that are as relevant now as they were then. You move closer to the sleeper area and feel the rough texture of the straw under your fingertips. The rushes strewn across the floor carry the faint, earthy scent of dried plants, slightly sweet and slightly dusty. And you notice how they form an uneven but comforting carpet for small bodies to rest upon. Each night, these rushes were swept, replaced, and layered, a ritual that added both hygiene and insulation. Children learned early to arrange the straw to create small hollows for their bodies, tucking legs and arms into positions that trapped warmth. You can almost feel the subtle crunch under your weight, the gentle movement of tiny leaves shifting with each adjustment, and the faint whisper of past nights pressed into the fibres. Mattresses were rare luxuries, often little more than tightly bundled straw, sometimes encased in rough linen. You can imagine a child lying on one, knees drawn to chest, breathing visible in the cold air, and yet feeling a small sense of comfort from the uneven cushion beneath. Historians debate whether such bedding was meant primarily for comfort or for practical insulation. Some evidence suggests that families prioritized areas near the hearth for more carefully prepared sleeping surfaces, while children further away relied on thinner layers of rushes and scraps of cloth. Regardless, you feel how each texture, each material, is integral to endurance, a physical adaptation to environmental scarcity. The smell of the rushes mingles with other household scents, the lingering aroma of evening stew, the faint tang of animal hide stored in corners, the dry smell of wool blankets pressed against the walls. You notice how these combined smells create a sense of place, a consistent olfactory environment that children would recognize and associate with warmth and safety, even in the absence of fire. The familiarity of these scents offers reassurance, a subtle comfort that seeps into the senses and slows the tension of cold. Layered over the rushes, some homes had small cloths or old garments. Tattered yet precious, children wrapped themselves in these, feeling the difference between the scratch of coarse wool and the smoother weave of linen. You can almost sense the careful folding, the deliberate positioning of each piece to maximize warmth, as if each night is a quiet exercise in problem solving. There is a rhythm to this preparation, arranging materials, tucking edges, adjusting positions until comfort, however modest, is achieved. It is an intimacy with textures and temperature, a dialogue between body and environment that shapes endurance from a young age. Evenings were often punctuated by small household practical tasks. Perhaps a child would arrange the rushes for a sibling, adjusting them to create a warmer nook near the hearth. You hear the faint rustle of straw as it's moved, the soft sigh of contentment as a body settles into the nest of fibres. Historians still argue about how standardized these practices were across regions. Some suggest that knowledge of rush arrangement was passed down informally from parent to child, while others propose that children develop personalized strategies based on observation and necessity. Either way, you sense a remarkable adaptability, a quiet ingenuity born of repeated exposure to discomfort. As you look closer, you notice subtle differences in the materials. Some rushes are thicker, their stems sturdier, while others are thin and brittle. The choice of rush may reflect what was locally available, or which parts of the floor received heavier traffic during the day. Children became attuned to these differences, understanding intuitively which areas offered more comfort and which required layering or additional fabric. You can almost feel the gentle give of a softer bundle beneath your weight, contrasted with the harder, stiffer patches that need careful positioning to avoid discomfort. The night air still presses against the windows, carrying a sharpness that seeps into unprotected corners. You sense how the physical arrangement of straw and rushes functions as more than just a bed. It is a defensive measure against cold, a layer between the child and the relentless chill. Each night becomes a negotiation with temperature, a small puzzle solved with materials at hand. You notice how children shift frequently, curling, uncurling, or sliding closer to siblings to preserve warmth. The living room, bedroom, and cooking area often overlap in these homes, so warmth accumulates in concentrated pockets, and children move to capture it whenever possible. You catch the faint scent of dampness in some corners, a reminder of the imperfect insulation of medieval buildings. Straw and rushes, though helpful, absorb moisture and lose some of their insulating quality when wet. Children learn to adjust, keeping certain areas clear or adding extra layers, a tactile awareness of the environment's limitations. There is a rhythm to this practice. Observe, adjust, and adapt, repeated every night. You feel a subtle admiration for the attentiveness required, the quiet intelligence that ensures survival in a setting that offers no modern conveniences. Beyond practicality, there is a comforting ritual to the arrangement of bedding. Perhaps a parent or older sibling smooths rushes with care, creating a slightly firmer area for a younger child. You hear faint whispers of advice and gentle corrections or encouraging words as preparations proceed. Even the act of lying down and pressing into the straw carries sensory information: softness, slight movement, the imprint of previous nights, the faint warmth that lingers from a resting body. Historians suggest that such tactile familiarity may have helped children feel secure and sleep more soundly, even in harsh conditions. At times, small objects are tucked among the rushes: a carved wooden toy, a smooth stone, a cherished trinket. You imagine the comfort these items provide. Tangible evidence of care and personal space amid shared sleeping arrangements. Children often learn to arrange their possessions strategically, ensuring they were near yet not buried beneath the rough textures of straw. The presence of these objects adds an emotional warmth that complements the physical, a subtle but powerful reminder of continuity, identity, and safety. Fires, when present, cast shadows that flicker across the straw and rushes, creating shifting patterns that draw attention and provide slight visual distraction from discomfort. You notice how a child might shift positions to catch the light or the residual warmth near the hearth. Even minimal illumination offers a sense of presence and awareness, reinforcing spatial familiarity and easing anxiety. Historians still debate whether children actively use such strategies or simply benefited passively from proximity, yet you can sense an intuitive adaptation to environmental cues. The smell of earth and plants in the rushes, combined with faint household aromas, creates a layered olfactory landscape that defines the space. You feel how this sensory environment is continuous, wrapping children in familiarity and offering subtle reassurance. Even in the absence of modern heating, the combination of textures, smells, and proximity to others forms a network of comfort. Each element, the rough straw, the layered cloth, the faint warmth of nearby bodies, interacts to produce a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. Children become sensitive to differences in texture and temperature, learning through touch which areas of their sleeping space are optimal. You can imagine the soft rustle of moving bodies, the gentle shift of straw beneath her hands and knees, the delicate balancing act of maintaining comfort in a room that offers only partial warmth. These nightly routines require attentiveness and adaptability, and children internalize them from a very young age. The result is a finely tuned awareness of environment, an instinctive skill that blends practicality and intuition. Sleep arrives gradually, each child settling into the contours of their prepared space. You notice how the subtle warmth from shared bodies creates pockets of comfort, how the layered rushes and scraps of cloth offer modest insulation, and how the sensory familiarity of smell and texture promotes rest. Even as the cold outside presses against walls and windows, the room feels alive with quiet vigilance. You sense that these nights are more than mere endurance. They are an education in subtle adaptation, an immersive lesson in resilience that shapes both body and mind. The hushed rhythm of breath, the faint creak of beams, the gentle shifting of straw, and the occasional whisper form a lullaby of survival. You feel how each element, the rushes, the bedding, the carefully arranged scraps, contributes to a sense of stability, a tangible assurance that the night can be survived. These textures and scents, these small deliberate acts, carry both history and immediacy, allowing you to experience a medieval child's world through touch, smell, and perception. Finally, as you lie in this imagined space, you can feel the subtle warmth of bodies and materials merging, creating a fragile but persistent comfort. The night stretches quietly, a long, slow rhythm of adaptation, observation, and endurance. The rushes beneath you, the straw around you, and the tactile and olfactory cues surrounding you combine to form a cocoon of survival, offering a sensory window into the ingenuity and resilience of children who faced cold nights without fire or blanket. You feel the weight of layered clothing as you step into a small medieval bedroom. Children wore multiple tunics, each layer adding a small barrier against the relentless cold. Coarse wool shirts brushed against linen undergarments, and stockings, often mended countless times, reached nearly to the knees. You notice how the fabric rubs against skin, sometimes itchy, sometimes comforting, and how children instinctively adjusted folds or pulled edges tighter to preserve warmth. Evidence suggests that layering was not just about practicality, but also about signalling care. As parents took time to repair and maintain garments, hands and feet were particularly vulnerable. You can imagine tiny fingers tucked into sleeves or pressed against the body, searching for warmth. The simplest gloves, if they existed, were often scraps sewn together from old garments. Some families stuffed them with straw or wool to create improvised insulation. Interestingly, some children were known to slip small heated stone into pockets or wraps for fleeting relief, a secret strategy passed down quietly from older siblings or neighbours. Outer garments varied widely depending on resources. Coats of sheepskin, often patched with leather scraps, were worn over tunics, sometimes only during short treks outside. Scarcity meant that many garments were repurposed, with older siblings handing down layers to younger ones. The smell of tanned hides mingled with the faint odour of damp wool, creating a scent unique to a cold, lived-in home. It's uncertain whether children were encouraged to keep these coats on while indoors, or if they were removed at night, adding another layer of risk during freezing evenings. Belts and sashes served dual purposes. You notice a thin leather cord wrapped around a child's tunic, holding a small knife or a bag of nuts. Beyond practicality, these accessories helped compress layers snugly to the body. Reducing drafts, some accounts suggest that belts were also used to create pockets of warmth, a subtle and clever adaptation that might seem trivial to outsiders but was vital in daily survival. Headwear was another subtle but essential layer. Simple linen caps or hoods were common, and sometimes small scraps of wool were tied around ears. The head loses heat quickly, and children learned early to protect themselves even when sleep beckoned. Surprisingly, in some regions, children tucked herbs into caps, mints, or thyme, believed to generate warmth or ward off winter chills. The effectiveness of this practice is unclear, yet it reflects the creativity and observation that children and families employed. Footwear was often uneven in quality. Soft leather shoes, if available, were lined with straw or cloth. You can sense the cold seeping through gaps, especially in wet or icy conditions. Children adapted by wrapping legs in extra fabric or pressing together to share warmth, and went barefoot indoors, using body heat from siblings or parents to offset the chill. A practice that may have seemed harsh but was surprisingly effective in conserving worn leather shoes for outdoor tasks. Socks and stockings were not uniform. Evidence from small archaeological finds shows a mix of knitted wool, woven scraps, and patched pieces. Each stitch mattered, and children learned to position rough seams away from sensitive skin. Some families even tucked dried grasses inside stockings for insulation. Curiously, a few records mention children adding small bits of wool from sheared sheep directly into worn footwear, creating an improvised sock lining. Whether these practices were widespread or isolated remains a matter of debate among researchers. Children also learned movement as a warming strategy. You can imagine a small child hopping lightly from one spot to another, adjusting position to avoid lingering drafts. Even simple motions like rubbing hands together or stretching legs under layered clothing contributed to modest warmth. These movements became habitual, a bodily memory of cold nights, and a practical lesson in self-preservation. Experts are divided over whether these habits were consciously taught or evolved instinctively through repeated exposure to discomfort. The texture of layered fabrics influenced comfort as much as warmth. Rough wool could irritate, yet children adapted, pressing softer linen against skin when possible. You notice how they shifted slightly while lying down, seeking positions where seams did not press or scratch. Each movement is small and deliberate, part of a nightly ritual shaped by necessity. Evidence from household accounts indicates that some children had personalized sleeping arrangements that incorporated particular clothing layers, a subtle reflection of resourcefulness and individual preference. Undergarments were minimal but functional. Linen shirts and underpants absorbed sweat and provided a thin buffer between skin and rougher outer layers. Interestingly, these garments were sometimes scented with herbs or washed with perfumed water when available, creating a faint but noticeable aroma in the cold, stagnant air of winter room. The effect was modest, yet it demonstrates an attentiveness to comfort and personal care despite scarcity. Belts, hoods, layered tunics, stockings, and simple footwear together formed a patchwork of protection. You can feel how children maneuvered within these layers, adjusting edges and tucking in stray pieces of cloth to trap warmth. The cumulative effect, while never completely eliminating cold, provided enough comfort to endure long, freezing nights. Even the smallest adjustments mattered. A folded sleeve, a tucked edge, or a pressed hand could make the difference between shivering and tolerable warmth. Some families encouraged sharing clothing. You notice siblings exchanging scarves or caps during particularly cold nights. This sharing was both practical and symbolic, a subtle lesson in cooperation and communal care. Accounts vary, but some suggest that children preferred their own worn garments, having grown accustomed to their specific fits and textures. Others welcomed a sibling's layer for extra insulation, a quiet negotiation of warmth and familiarity. Hair also played a role in insulation. Long locks could be tucked into tunics or hoods to reduce heat loss. In some regions, braided hair served as natural padding beneath coarse clothing, a subtle form of self-protection that speaks to the ingenuity of children adapting to their environment. It is uncertain how widespread this practice was, but surviving accounts suggest that even small details mattered in daily life. You notice that clothing choices were intertwined with domestic routines. Layers were adjusted as meals were prepared, chores were completed, and the day's light faded. The interplay between movement and fabric and body temperature created a continuous adaptation to environmental conditions. Children learned these strategies gradually, developing both practical skill and bodily intuition. Even in the absence of fire, clothing provided a crucial buffer. You can feel how wool, linen, and leather interacted with skin and with each other, forming pockets of warmth and reducing exposure to drafts. Surprisingly, some children layered patches of cloth in unconventional ways, wrapping scraps around ankles or wrists for additional protection. This improvisation demonstrates the creative problem-solving that became an essential survival skill. Nighttime rituals included inspecting layers. Children adjusted folds, smoothed wrinkles, and tucked edges against the body. The sound of fabric rubbing against itself, faint but constant, becomes part of the sensory environment of the room. You sense how these small actions contributed to psychological comfort, creating a perception of control in a space where temperature could otherwise feel oppressive. The cumulative effect of layered clothing, or careful positioning, and small movements allowed children to survive cold nights with limited fire. Even when rooms were drafty and temperatures fell sharply, the body adapted, aided by strategy, observation, and the tactile knowledge gained through experience. You feel a subtle warmth from imagining these routines, a connection across centuries to children who learn to endure. Finally, as you settle into the room and the evening deepens, you sense how clothing, layers, and human ingenuity merge into a system of protection and comfort. The scratches of wool, the faint scent of herbs, the touch of a sibling's hand all form an intricate network that sustains life and provides reassurance. This patchwork of protection, though simple by modern standards, is a testament to human adaptability, showing how children navigated the cold with creativity, patience, and a quiet understanding of their environment. You inhale the faint aroma of evening meals as you imagine children gathering around modest bowls of porridge or thin soup. Evidence shows that medieval winter diets were simple but functional, often designed to provide sustenance and a sense of internal warmth. You can almost feel the heat rising from the bowl, the steam brushing against cheeks, and the faint clatter of wooden spoons on pottery. Even a small meal could infuse a child with enough energy to endure the long night ahead. It is clear that what was eaten mattered not only for nutrition, but for the subtle comfort it provided against the cold. The ingredients were humble. Grains, root vegetables, and occasionally salted meat formed the base of many meals. Some families supplemented their food with ale or small amounts of milk, creating drinks that warmed from within. Surprisingly, a few accounts describe children nibbling on nuts or dried fruits before bed, a treat that added both sweetness and calories. The scarcity of food made each bite precious, and children developed an acute awareness of what was available. You notice how the faint tang of broth mixes with the smell of straw and damp clothing, a layered sensory environment that defines the night. You can hear the soft sip of porridge, the careful clink of a spoon against a bowl, and the muted shuffle of feet as children move closer to capture residual warmth from older siblings. Internal warmth from food was a subtle, temporary comfort, yet it created a sense of bodily stability. Some families believed that certain spices, though rare, could stimulate circulation and provide a fleeting heat that complemented layered clothing in close proximity to others. Experts are uncertain about how widespread these practices were, but they demonstrate a keen awareness of physiology and adaptation. In some households, ale or weak beer was given even to children. Curiously, this practice was thought to help endure long, cold nights, providing warmth and a mild soporific effect. While modern perspective might raise concerns, the medieval rationale centered on survival, hydration, and the psychological comfort of a warm beverage. You can almost feel the heat spreading through a small body, subtle but reassuring, easing tension in stiff muscles and chilled limbs. Meal times were communal, reinforcing bonds and shared warmth. You notice the subtle rhythm of conversation, soft laughter, and occasional whispers as children and parents coordinate tasks for the next day. Sharing food not only provided nutrition, but a sense of order and security in a world that could otherwise feel harsh and unpredictable. Evidence suggests that even small children had responsibilities during mealtime, from stirring porridge to passing bowls, fostering a sense of contribution and inclusion. The texture of the food mattered as much as its warmth. Thick porridge pressed against a spoon, leaving faint streaks as it was lifted to the lips. You can feel the grainy consistency that has light chewiness of root vegetables, and the warmth that spread slowly through the chest. Some children favoured small morsels, savouring taste and heat, while others quickly consumed their rations to preserve energy. Scholars are divided on how deliberate these eating habits were, or how much instinct versus instruction guided them. Yet the variation reveals adaptability and attention to bodily needs. Evening meals sometimes included small rituals. A child might quietly dip a piece of bread into broth, testing its warmth, or adjust a layer of clothing while lifting a spoon. These actions are subtle strategies for comfort and survival, blending the practical with the habitual. Evidence from household accounts indicates that children learn to pace themselves, matching intake to expected sleep or chores, demonstrating an early awareness of physiological needs. Water management was equally important. You notice the faint metallic scent of water drawn from barrels or wells, often stored indoors in small quantities to prevent freezing. Children sometimes fetched water for cooking or cleaning before settling in for the night, their hands chilled despite layered clothing. The combination of warm food and limited fluid intake created a delicate balance, ensuring hydration without excessive exposure to cold. Historical accounts suggest that children quickly learn these routines, making them instinctive elements of winter survival. Sweet or savoury additions were rare, but celebrated. You imagine a child receiving a small portion of cheese or dried fruit, the taste vivid against the bland backdrop of typical fare. These treats offered both energy and psychological relief, reinforcing the connection between nourishment and comfort. Interestingly, some children were known to hide small pieces for later enjoyment, a subtle rebellion against scarcity that also provided an extra sense of control over one's environment. Beyond calories, food symbolized care. Parents carefully divided portions, sometimes giving children the first share of hot meals to ensure warmth reached the youngest. You notice the intentionality in these gestures, the unspoken lessons of protection and attentiveness. Even in scarcity, children could feel valued, their survival intertwined with the careful planning and observation of those around them. Nighttime consumption was often brief. Children quickly finished their portions, allowing time for chores, preparation of sleeping areas, and moments of rest before dark fully set in. You hear the faint clatter of utensils, the rustle of cloth as bodies shift, and the soft sighs of satisfaction as warmth from food spreads slowly through the sadi. These small sensory cues, combined with texture, aroma, and taste, create a layered understanding of medieval nightly life. Some meals were cooked over small fires or braziers, their smoke lingering in tight rooms. You notice the smell of burning wood mixed with porridge, a scent that defines winter evenings in modest households. Interestingly, the smoke could also serve as mild insulation, raising the apparent temperature slightly and discouraging drafts. Children learned to position themselves carefully, gaining maximum benefit from limited heat sources. The act of eating became a lesson in balance. Children learned when to move closer to the fire, when to huddle for warmth, and how to coordinate with siblings. You can feel the subtle tension of anticipation and relief, the combination of cold discomfort and the comfort of shared food. Some families developed unique recipes or rituals to extend warmth and energy through the night. Small innovations that might seem mundane but carried immense importance in survival. Shared meals also reinforced rhythm. Children learned that hunger would be followed by warmth, chores, or play, creating predictability in otherwise challenging circumstances. You notice how this rhythm is echoed in other aspects of daily life: clothing adjustments, rush bedding, and huddling strategies. Together, these patterns form a coherent system of adaptation, a network of practices that allowed medieval children to endure long, cold nights. Small portions of broth or ale could also serve medicinal purposes. Some families added herbs to stimulate circulation, relieve chills, or aid digestion. It is uncertain how effective these measures were, but they reflect an empirical approach to survival. Observe, adapt, and try subtle interventions. You sense how children, participating in preparation or consumption, internalizes knowledge about their bodies, warmth and nourishment from an early age. Evenings with food were a multi-sensory experience. You can smell the steam rising from bowls, hear soft murmurs of conversation, feel the heat radiating through layers of clothing, and notice the tactile comfort of a wooden spoon or bowl. The combination of sensation, taste, and proximity to family creates a subtle but enduring warmth that extends beyond physical comfort. Evidence suggests that these experiences fostered resilience, allowing children to cope with long, cold nights with a sense of rhythm, security, and continuity. Finally, as the meal concludes, you sense a calm settling over the household. Children shift closer to siblings, hands warm from contact, bodies albeit subtly insulated by layered clothing and shared heat. The faint warmth from consumed food lingers, a gentle pulse that eases tension. Even as the night grows colder, the combination of nourishment, proximity, and habit allows children to prepare for sleep, creating a quiet harmony between body environment and human ingenuity. You feel the quiet presence of siblings as you imagine a small group huddled together on a rough-rush mattress, bodies pressed close, sharing warmth and instinctively. Each child discovers how proximity can replace missing blankets or insufficient fires. Evidence from household accounts shows that family members, particularly siblings, were vital in providing physical comfort during the coldest nights. You notice the gentle rhythm of breathing, the subtle rise and fall of shoulders, and the faint heat radiating between bodies, a natural warmth that does more than merely stave off frost. Parents often position children deliberately, placing the youngest or weakest in the centre of the cluster. This careful arrangement maximised shared heat and minimised exposure to cold corners of the room. Interestingly, some accounts mention older children wrapping arms around younger siblings, a silent gesture of care and protection. You can feel the subtle pressure of small bodies pressing together, a tactile reminder that warmth was both practical and emotional. The act of huddling became a nightly ritual, as much about reassurance as about physical survival. Some families supplemented this strategy with simple materials. Pieces of wool, linen scraps, or straw bundles were arranged to create small insulating pockets. You notice how children shift, tuck, and nestle to make the most of these additions, optimizing contact and minimizing drafts. It remains uncertain whether these arrangements were passed down intentionally or discovered individually. Yet the consistent practices across households suggest a mix of learned behavior and instinctive adaptation. The sense of touch becomes acutely refined in such settings. You can feel every contour of a sibling's arm, every slight movement as one shifts for comfort, every pulse of heat travelling through shared bodies. Children developed a subtle awareness of temperature gradients, instinctively adjusting positions to capture warmth. Some accounts suggest that older siblings became adept at distributing warmth, positioning themselves strategically to ensure that everyone received some benefit. The quiet negotiation of space and contact demonstrates early social intelligence coupled with practical survivals. You notice that the act of huddling also created psychological comfort. The shared heat was tangible, but so too was the sense of security, a reinforcement that children were not alone against the harsh environment. Stories and whispered conversations often accompanied these nightly arrangements, soft words blending with the gentle sounds of settling straw. Curiously, some children were reported to hum or sing quietly while holding siblings close, a subtle strategy to distract from the cold and lull both themselves and others towards sleep. Feet and hands pressed against shared bodies provided unexpected benefits. You can feel the pulse of warmth travelling from core to extremity, the subtle exchange that blankets could not replicate. It is uncertain how widely recognised these benefits were among medieval families, but children intuitively discovered the efficiency of proximity, even when physical layers were minimal. Human contact functioned as a reliable form of insulation. Animals sometimes joined these nightly clusters, adding a further layer of warmth. Cats or small dogs curled near children, their fur soft against skin, creating an additional barrier against drafts. Interestingly, some accounts suggest that children would deliberately allow pets to sleep under thin blankets or near the hearth, understanding instinctively that their presence could amplify comfort. You can feel the gentle tremor of a cat's purring or the warmth of a small dog pressed against legs, subtle but reassuring, a companion in both body and spirit. Shared body heat was often combined with layered clothing and straw bedding. You notice how these elements work together, the rough wool softened by contact, the straw compressing under bodies to trap warmth, the occasional flicker of light from a dying hearth adding minimal heat but maximum comfort. Experts are divided over how much of a difference this combination made versus simple clothing or bedding alone. Yet the recurring use of these methods points to their practical effectiveness. The dynamics of huddling were learned early. You can imagine a child noticing that curling tightly conserves warmth, that pressing against another's back provides relief to cold extremities, or that shifting slightly can redistribute heat to those most exposed. Each night became a lesson in anatomy, physics, and social coordination, a combination of observation and experience that shaped bodily awareness for life. Even in SARS, children communicated. A small nudge, a shifting shoulder, or the placement of hands conveyed messages: move closer, shift here, nestle a little further. You can sense how these subtle interactions reinforced bonds and created a shared understanding of survival strategies. Some households relied on these nonverbal cues extensively, while others incorporated whispered instructions or gentle guidance, a mixture of teaching and instinctual learning. Sleep arrived gradually, with children entwined like threads in a living tapestry. The warmth from shared bodies created pockets of comfort, subtle yet persistent. You feel how pressure and contact distribute heat, how even minimal movement can either enhance or diminish this effect. It is an intricate system, honed over countless nights, a combination of ingenuity, observation, and the quiet rhythms of family life. Beyond survival, there was an emotional dimension. You notice the reassurance in proximity, the subtle ease in knowing someone is nearby, awake or asleep, even when rooms were drafty and fires weak. This simple act of closeness provided a buffer against fear and discomfort. You can feel the security transmitted through small touches, a reminder that warmth is as much about presence as it is about temperature. The night stretches slowly. You hear faint rustles as children adjust positions and sighs as they settle, the occasional creak of timber under shifting weight. Each small sound is a thread in the fabric of nocturnal life, connecting warmth, touch, and security. The combination of layered bodies, straw bedding, and subtle movement forms a living system of survival, one that requires attention, cooperation, and a quiet awareness of each other. Interestingly, children sometimes develop playful strategies to maximize warmth. They might gently shift to tease a sibling or rearrange blankets. Small acts of agency within strict environmental limits. These actions, though subtle, illustrate both adaptability and creativity. You can sense the faint echoes of laughter or soft whispers, blending with the tactile experience of shared heat, forming a comforting human rhythm. Finally, as the night deepens and the household falls into stillness, the warmth persists, bodies pressed close, breath synchronized, and layers of clothing and bedding working in tandem. Children navigate the cold with a quiet resilience. You feel the subtle pulse of collective warmth, the gentle security of closeness, and the intimate understanding of how proximity can transform discomfort into survival, comfort, and even tenderness. You hear the faint crackle of a dying hearth, the last sparks fading into smoke that curls lazily toward the low ceiling. Records indicate that in many medieval homes, fires were kept small and intermittent, often burning only long enough to cook the evening meal or heat water. You can almost feel the chill pressing into the corners of the room, the subtle draft sneaking under doors and through gaps in the timber. Children quickly learn to judge the fire's lifespan, moving closer while embers glowed and shifting away once the heat began to fade. Logs were scarce, and fuel was precious. Some families used small offcuts, dried dung, or even peat, each offering different warmth and scent. Curiously, children sometimes experimented with stacking materials differently, creating tiny pockets of heat near their sleeping areas. While this might seem inventive or even playful, it was a crucial survival strategy. It remains unclear whether these improvisations were widely taught or emerged spontaneously as children observed patterns in burning and warmth. The room itself reacts subtly to the fire. Smoke stains the walls, leaving a faint smell of soot that mingles with the earthiness of rushes on the floor. You can hear the soft hiss of moisture escaping from damp logs, a quiet reminder that even fuel interacts with the environment, affecting how heat radiates. Some households relied on a single hearth to warm multiple rooms, a practice that required careful planning. You might imagine children curling close together near doorways or partially partitioned spaces, creating their own microclimates within drafty structures. Evidence suggests that fires were not always dependable. On particularly cold nights, embers smouldered but did not produce sufficient warmth. You can almost feel the disappointment of a child as the heat fades, replaced by the familiar bite of winter air. Some accounts describe children stacking straw, rearranging layers of clothing, or pressing closer to siblings in response. Experts are divided on how often such fires completely failed, and whether children relied primarily on shared body heat during these periods. Interestingly, fire placement sometimes followed unspoken household conventions. Larger homes might reserve the central hearth for cooking, leaving smaller alcoves for sleeping children with minimal embers nearby. Some families even built small fire pits along walls or within alcoves, a clever adaptation that concentrated warmth where it was most needed. You can feel the slight difference in air temperature between the hearth's glow and the shadowed edges of the room, a gradient that children quickly learn to navigate. The rhythm of tending the fire shapes evening life. A parent or older sibling might stoke embers, moving logs with care, creating bursts of warmth that last only moments. You notice the faint popping and occasional shower of sparks, a sensory cue that signals both comfort and impermanence. Children adapted, adjusting positions and clothing, or wrapping themselves in extra fabric to extend the limited heat. Accounts vary on whether children participated actively in stoking fires or merely observed and learned from distance. Yet it is clear they internalized patterns of warmth and timing from a very young age. Heat was fleeting but precious. You can imagine pressing a hand toward a residual ember, feeling the small surge of warmth, and sensing how the body responds instantly. Some families supplemented heat with ritual or superstition. Curiously, small charms or herbs might be placed near embers, believed to encourage the fire or protect sleepers from the chill. It's uncertain how widespread these beliefs were, yet they reflect a human tendency to combine practical survival with imaginative intervention, creating both physical and psychological comfort. The interaction between fire and clothing is subtle. Layered wool and linen trapped the heat radiating from embers, while straw bedding absorbed and retained warmth from fleeting exposure. You notice how children shift slightly, catching the last rising heat or pressing closer to siblings who share residual warmth. Some accounts suggest that children learned to gauge which clothing layers were most effective near the fire, adjusting folds or tucking edges to maximize insulation. This tactile experimentation becomes a nightly lesson in both comfort and endurance. Beyond survival, fires offered sensory engagement. You hear the gentle crackle, smell the faint smoke, see shadows flicker across walls, and feel the transient heat on your skin. These subtle signals provide reassurance, a rhythm of continuity amid the uncertainty of coals. Some children developed a heightened sensitivity to these cues, moving or adjusting instinctively to capture warmth, a form of adaptive intelligence shaped by repeated exposure to environmental challenges. Evenings with minimal fire were long and contemplative. You notice how children might gaze at the glowing embers, feeling a sense of calm or focusing on the warmth they provide. The fading light encourages stillness, allowing sleep to arrive gradually, supported by body heat and the comfort of routine. Contemporary accounts reveal that some children developed small strategies for conserving warmth during these periods, from curling tightly to covering exposed skin with improvised layers of cloth. Interestingly, household fires were rarely used continuously through the night. Evidence shows that many families preferred to extinguish embers after meals, reserving fuel for morning tasks or urgent needs. You can imagine children adapting instinctively, relying more on huddling together, layered clothing, and straw bedding to maintain comfort. These nightly negotiations between fire, clothing, and human contact form a delicate system of survival, blending sensory awareness with the learned strategies. Smoke from the hearth also played a subtle role. You notice how its movement signals changes in heat and oxygen, the smell lingering to mark areas that had been closest to embers. Some children recognized the scent and responded, shifting position or adjusting bedding to capture residual warmth. It is fascinating to consider how sensory knowledge extended beyond touch, incorporating smell, sight, and intuition into survival strategies. The combination of dwindling fear, layered clothing, and body heat created an environment where every small adjustment mattered. You can feel how children monitored temperature subconsciously, responding to the subtle cues of warmth or chill. Some accounts describe whispering advice or gentle nudges among siblings, a silent coordination to share heat efficiently. The household becomes a dynamic system, constantly responding to changing conditions and human needs. Finally, as embers fade completely, the room grows colder, yet the patterns of warmth and adaptation persist. You sense the lingering heat in straw, the residual warmth in layered clothing, and the quiet pulse of bodies pressed together. Even when fire is absent, the combination of ingenuity, observation, and shared presence allows children to endure, demonstrating resilience and adaptability in a world defined by its cold nights. You step outside with a child, feeling the sharp bite of evening air immediately nipping at exposed skin. Evidence suggests that children often completed chores before settling in for the night, and these tasks could expose them to bitter cold for extended periods. The ground crunches underfoot, frozen and uneven, and each step sends a shiver up through thin leather shoes. You notice how small hands clutch buckets or tools, fingers reddened by the cold, and how children adapt by moving deliberately, minimizing contact with the icy surfaces while still completing necessary work. Water collection is one of the most challenging pre-bed tasks. You can smell the faint metallic tang of ice melt in wells or frozen barrels, and the air feels damp and crisp, chilling exposed faces. Records show that many households relied on children to fetch water for cooking, washing, or animal care, often traversing long distances. Some children were known to carry containers in creative ways, balancing weight and preserving warmth simultaneously. It is uncertain how much of this skill was taught formally, but the efficiency with which children moved suggests a learned instinct developed over repeated exposure. Animal care was another essential duty. You hear the low murmur of livestock and the occasional bleat of a goat or sheep. Children fed hay and grain, often bending into the cold enclosures, their breath visible in clouds. Some accounts describe children using their own layered clothing to shield delicate young animals from frost for brief moments, a small act of care that also helped retain body heat. Experts are divided on whether these techniques were widespread or isolated adaptations, yet the logic of proximity to living warmth is clear. Curiously, children sometimes used the environment itself as a tool. They might kick snow into small mounds around their feet for insulation, or use hollowed-out logs as temporary shelters when chores took them farther from home. These improvisations show a keen observational skill and inventive approach to cold, blending survival with a subtle sense of play and experimentation. You can almost feel the satisfaction of these small victories, the momentary comfort that arises from clever use of limited resources. Some chores were repetitive but necessary. You hear the soft scrape of buckets against frozen barrels, the faint rustle of hay, and the muted thud of wood as animals are fed. The sensory rhythm of these tasks provides both structure and subtle feedback, guiding movements and reinforcing techniques for efficiency and warmth. Children learn to adapt their pace, moving more quickly when cold threatened, but slowing to ensure tasks were done carefully. Contemporary accounts reveal that these routines were often embedded in larger family schedules, forming a consistent pattern that shaped daily life. Occasionally, chores involved navigating uneven terrain. Frozen paths could be treacherous, forcing children to shift weight carefully and test each step. You notice how they balance buckets, drag small sledges of feed, or hold hands with siblings to maintain stability. Evidence shows that such physical awareness was honed over time, creating an intuitive understanding of how to move safely in winter conditions. Some children develop subtle strategies, like hopping lightly over slick patches or using bundled clothing to shield against wind, highlighting adaptability and creativity. Even brief exposure to the cold could be mitigated through layering. You feel the difference between air passing over a single tunic and the slight insulation of multiple layers compressed together. Some children tucked extra scraps of cloth into gloves or shoes, while others pressed closely to siblings or parents while tending outdoor tasks. Surprisingly, these small adjustments often had a significant impact on comfort and endurance, a lesson learned instinctively and reinforced through daily practice. The sensory environment outside is harsh but alive. You hear the wind rustling through trees or across rooftops, smell the faint musk of animals and damp earth, and feel the subtle bite of frost in each inhalation. Children became attuned to these cues, recognizing when the wind shifted or when surfaces became icy. Accounts vary on whether these observations were consciously noted or learned through experience, but the consistency across households suggests a strong adaptive response. Some children incorporated quiet play into chores, lightening the cold with imagination. You might see a small snowball tossed carefully, a whispered joke exchanged, or a rhythmic stomp of feet to generate warmth. These acts, while seemingly trivial, demonstrate resilience, turning necessary labor into moments of engagement and energy that countered fatigue and chill. It is fascinating how survival and play intertwined, revealing both practicality and the human need for levity even in harsh conditions. Finally, as tasks wind down, children return home with chilled hands and feet, but the experience has prepared them for the night. You notice how layered clothing, movement, and proximity to family reinforce each other, a multi-layered strategy that carries warmth from body, fabric, and routine. Even after exposure to the cold, the combination of indoor preparation, shared heat, and instinctive movement allows children to transition from outdoor chores to the relative shelter of the home, a fluid adaptation that defines the rhythm of medieval winter evenings. You notice the flickering shadows cast by dim candlelight on the rough walls as children prepare for sleep, and you can feel the subtle shift in atmosphere when whispers of superstition enter conversation. Surviving accounts indicate that families often relied on charms, amulets, or small rituals to protect children from the cold, illness, or unseen dangers. Some of these objects were tucked into beds, worn around the neck, or hidden beneath clothing. Curiously, a tiny piece of iron or a small carved figurine might serve as a protective talisman, believed to safeguard warmth and well-being throughout the night. Children often observe these rituals, learning the gestures and placements by watching older siblings or parents. Evidence suggests that the precise meaning of such charms could vary widely from household to household. You can almost feel the tactile presence of a small wooden charm in a child's hand, the smooth surface providing both comfort and a sense of control over an unpredictable environment. Some practices were symbolic, some practical, and the line between the two often blurred. Whispered incantations or soft prayers sometimes accompanied the preparation of bedding. You notice the way voices lower, how a gentle repetition of words seems to soothe both speaker and listener. Some records indicate that certain herbs were placed near sleeping children, such as rosemary, thyme, or lavender, to ward off cold or illness. Experts are divided about whether these herbs truly had a warming effect or whether their primary function was psychological, providing reassurance through scent and ritual. The act of placing protective objects could involve playful or imaginative elements. Children might hide charms within layers of straw or beneath scraps of cloth, creating little nests of security. Interestingly, some items were repurposed from everyday objects, like a small wooden button or a carved piece of bone, imbued with meaning by context and intent. You can sense how imagination and survival intertwined, with practical adaptations taking on a quasi-magical significance. Some families incorporated storytelling into these nightly protective routines. Tales of mischievous spirits, frost demons, or wandering animals accompany the placement of charms, subtly reinforcing vigilance and caution. You notice how these stories create a rhythm of sound and attention, guiding children to anticipate danger and reinforce careful behavior in the dark. Contemporary sources suggest that the combination of strength, charm, and gesture strengthened the child's sense of safety. Sleep preparation often involved sensory cues. You can feel the texture of layered bedding, smell the faint aroma of herbs, and hear the soft hum of whispered prayers. These cues work together to create a comforting environment, even when physical warmth was limited. Some accounts note that children became highly attuned to the presence or absence of these sensory signals, adjusting posture, layering, or proximity to others accordingly. Interestingly, small superstitions were sometimes linked directly to physical strategies for warmth. A charm placed near the feet might serve both symbolic and practical purposes, signaling a boundary while encouraging the child to curl or huddle in a particular position. Some children develop personal routines, combining observation, inherited practices, and improvisation to maintain a sense of control over their environment. You notice the subtle coordination between these tactile, olfactory, and visual cues, forming a multi-layered approach to comfort and protection. Outdoor superstitions occasionally influenced indoor behavior. You can imagine children drawing circles in straw or placing tiny objects near doors or windows, an attempt to contain warmth or guard against drafts. Evidence shows that these practices could vary significantly by region, influenced by local beliefs and the availability of materials. Some practices were purely symbolic, while others had an intuitive basis in observation, such as positioning objects to block cold air. Family involvement was critical. Older siblings and parents often guided these rituals, ensuring that younger children felt secure and that protective measures were correctly positioned. You notice how gestures, words, and objects combine to create a layered sense of care, both tangible and intangible. Even subtle actions, like smoothing a blanket over a charm or tucking an amulet into clothing, carry meaning and provide reassurance in addition to any practical benefit. Finally, the cumulative effect of superstition, ritual, and touch creates a quiet, gentle environment. Children feel a subtle warmth not only from clothing or proximity, but also from the knowledge that precautions have been taken. You can sense the blending of practicality, imagination, and reassurance, forming an intricate system of comfort and psychological resilience, even in the coldest, darkest nights. These practices offered both tangible and emotional insulation, a testament to the ingenuity and care embedded in medieval childhood routines. You notice the faint chill in the air as the night deepens, carrying with it the sharp scent of damp wood and the subtle tang of smoke lingering from earlier fires. Records indicate that exposure to cold nights could worsen common ailments such as coughs, fevers, and skin irritations among children. You feel how a thin layer of clothing can make the difference between enduring the chill and succumbing to discomfort. Even modest warmth from shared blankets or huddling with siblings provided crucial relief against the elements. Families often use simple remedies to counter the cold and its effects. Evidence suggests that herbal infusions, such as chamomile or sage tea, were given to children to soothe chills and support digestion. Some accounts describe rubbing hands and feet with warmed oils or animal fats, a practice believed to promote circulation. Surprisingly, a small number of families tucked heated stones near children's feet or pressed them against the body, a tactile intervention that offered fleeting warmth and comfort. Exposure to drafts was particularly dangerous. You can sense how children instinctively position themselves to avoid windows and gaps in walls, curling tightly or pressing against siblings. Some households hung bundles of rushes or cloth near doorways and cracks to reduce airflow. Experts are divided over how systematically these measures were employed, yet the evidence indicates that observation and adaptation were essential survival skills. Children quickly learned which spots were most protected and how to use available materials to block the cold. Animals played a subtle role in warmth and comfort. You notice the low rustle of barn cats or dogs sleeping near children, bodies pressed close to share heat. Some families encouraged this practice intentionally, recognizing that the presence of fur could augment clothing and bedding. Curiously, children sometimes arranged pets in positions that maximized warmth, placing them at feet or along the torso. It's uncertain how deliberate these arrangements were, but the repeated accounts suggest that both instinct and experience guided these nightly strategies. Medical understanding was limited, yet children's resilience was remarkable. Contemporary accounts reveal that parents monitored signs of illness, using mild herbal treatments or layering children with extra clothing when fevers struck. The effects of cold were unpredictable, and children often developed a keen sensitivity to early symptoms, adjusting posture, layering, and proximity to others. Some evidence suggests that this awareness was passed down orally, forming a subtle but critical knowledge network within families. Nighttime air carried sensory cues that influenced survival behavior. You can feel the bite of frost through layered clothing, hear the creak of timber expanding in the cold, and notice the faint smells of damp earth or hay. Children interpreted these signals, adjusting body positions or seeking closer contact with siblings. Accounts vary on whether this was conscious behavior or instinctive adaptation, but the consistent practices across households suggest a deep, embodied knowledge of their environment. Shared routines mitigated the impact of cold on health. You notice children performing small rituals before settling down, like pressing palms together to generate warmth or rubbing clothing to trap heat. Surprisingly, some engaged in simple rhythmic movements or light stretching to keep circulation steady. These small actions were often taught by older siblings or parents and became ingrained habits, a blend of practical instruction and intuitive response. Some households combined warmth strategies with herbal protection. Evidence shows that dried herbs such as mint, thyme, or rosemary were tucked into bedding, believed to both promote circulation and repel harmful spirits. The effectiveness of these practices in medical terms is uncertain, yet they illustrate how sensory perception, belief, and practical adaptation intertwine. You can smell the faint scent of these herbs, subtle but reassuring as you imagine children nestling into straw mattresses. Curiously, children sometimes invented their own techniques. You might see a small hand pressing extra straw near exposed ankles or wrapping a scrap of cloth around fingers before sleep. These improvisations reveal ingenuity and personal experimentation with survival strategies. Accounts suggest that such behaviors were encouraged subtly, with parents allowing children to learn from experience while observing outcomes. Finally, the night deepens into quiet stillness. Children lie close together, layered in clothing, pressed against siblings, and partially insulated by straw bedding. The combined effect of body heat, tactile awareness, and subtle rituals allows them to survive the cold and reduce the impact of illness. You feel the gentle rhythm of breathing and warmth, the interplay of sensory input and instinctive adaptation, and the quiet persistence of human resilience. In this environment, endurance, observation, and creativity intertwine, forming the invisible threads that safeguard children against the harsh realities of winter nights. You notice the empty corners of barns and streets as you imagine orphaned or homeless children moving through the medieval night. Evidence suggests that many of these children lacked the shelter and warmth that family homes provided, leaving them exposed to frost and damp. You can feel the chill seeping through thin, worn clothing, the wind tugging at layered scraps, and the cold pressing against skin in sharp, unyielding waves. Despite these conditions, some children displayed remarkable ingenuity, finding hidden nooks, abandoned buildings, or haystacks that offered partial insulation. Records indicate that survival strategies varied widely. Some children curled themselves into small, protected spaces under bridges or in empty carts, using whatever materials they could find to block drafts. Interestingly, small groups often banded together, sharing warmth and pooling meager resources. The social aspect of survival became critical, with cooperation providing both practical heat and emotional reassurance. You notice the subtle tension of trust and awareness in these arrangements, the way bodies shift to preserve warmth without compromising space. Sleeping arrangements were improvised. You can feel the rough texture of straw or discarded cloth beneath a small body, pressed unevenly into hollows that offered some shelter. Contemporary accounts reveal that even a single layer of fabric could make a difference, particularly when combined with huddling alongside another child. Experts are divided on how consistently these methods were employed, but repeated observations suggest a widespread instinctive understanding of layering and proximity. Food scarcity compounded the challenge. Children often scavenged for scraps or relied on the kindness of passers-by. You can sense the subtle anxiety as they balance immediate needs against exposure to cold. Some records mention children carrying small portions of bread or cheese tucked into cloths, creating a temporary buffer against hunger and cold. Curiously, this practice sometimes became ritualized, with the care in wrapping food reflecting a learned attentiveness to resource management. Clothing was typically insufficient. You can feel the uneven layers of patched garments, the stiff wool rubbing against bare skin, and the gaps where insulation was missing entirely. Children adapted by twisting fabric, pressing scraps against extremities, or layering garments unconventionally to trap heat. Some evidence indicates that older children mentored younger ones in these techniques, passing on practical knowledge for enduring cold nights. Shelter, when available, was often communal. You notice the faint murmur of voices in an abandoned barn or under a bridge as children huddle together. Documents indicate that shared warmth in such spaces was both a survival tactic and a form of social structure. Surprisingly, some children developed informal hierarchies, negotiating positions closer to the center of a huddle, where warmth was greatest. This instinctive organization demonstrates both resourcefulness and an intuitive understanding of environmental physics. Water and hygiene were ongoing concerns. You can smell the faint dampness of makeshift sleeping areas, the musty odor of straw or cloth used for bedding. Contemporary accounts reveal that exposure to wet conditions increased susceptibility to illness, prompting children to improvise drainage, position themselves strategically, or prioritize dry spots. Experts are divided on whether such measures significantly impacted survival rates, yet the repeated practice across regions suggests a practical response to environmental challenges. The environment itself offered subtle aids. You might notice sun-warmed walls, haystacks, or slight depressions in the earth that provided partial insulation during the day. Children often memorize the landscape, returning to favored locations for temporary shelter. Curiously, some improvise mini-huts using branches or discarded boards, demonstrating ingenuity in using the surrounding materials to combat cold. It remains uncertain how often these constructions were reused or how durable they could be, but they represent adaptive thinking under duress. Social networks extended beyond immediate companions. Records indicate that older neighbors or sympathetic adults sometimes provided food, a layer of straw, or minimal supervision. You can sense the tension between independence and reliance on external support, the delicate balance between agency and vulnerability. Accounts vary on how frequently such aid was available, but even intermittent support could be decisive in survival. Children also develop psychological coping mechanisms. You notice the faint humming, whispered songs, or imaginative play that occupies the mind while enduring physical discomfort. Evidence suggests that such activities were vital for maintaining morale and conserving energy. You can feel the subtle comfort derived from these practices, the way imagination and social interaction create resilience in the absence of warmth and security. Finally, as night deepens, the improvisations, social bonds, and small rituals form a fragile ecosystem of survival. Children rely on instinct, observation, and each other to endure the cold. You feel the delicate balance between exposure and protection, hunger and energy, vigilance and rest. Even without conventional shelter, warmth, or routine, they navigate a harsh environment with remarkable adaptability, illustrating the resilience and ingenuity that define medieval childhood in its most vulnerable form. You feel the cold seep through cracks as you imagine children entering unheated schoolhouses. Records indicate that classrooms in medieval towns were often little more than sparsely furnished rooms with rough wooden benches and minimal insulation. The air carries a faint smell of chalk, dust, and worn wood, mingling with the lingering scent of damp clothing from the walk to school. You notice how children huddle together, pressing shoulders against each other, drawing warmth from shared proximity as they prepare for lessons. Writing implements were simple and often awkward to handle. Quills, sometimes brittle and uneven, dipped into inkwells filled with thick, dark ink, required careful attention. Some children were known to blow softly on the nib to prevent freezing, curiously adapting tools to the cold environment. Evidence suggests that teachers accepted these small improvised strategies, recognizing that comfort and endurance influenced learning. You can hear faint murmurs of recitation, the scraping of quills against parchment, and occasional coughs amplified by chill. Contemporary accounts reveal that lessons were often brief, interspersed with pauses to allow hands to warm or to perform minor stretching exercises. Some scholars suggest that these interruptions were not merely practical but also provided rhythm and structure, helping children maintain focus despite discomfort. Layered clothing remained essential even indoors. You notice children tugging sleeves, adjusting tunics, and pressing fabric against exposed ankles. Records indicate that some older students assisted younger ones with clothing, tying together blankets or tucking scarves to maintain warmth. It remains unclear whether this was a common practice in all schools or limited to certain regions, but repeated accounts highlight the collaborative aspect of enduring cold environments. Seating arrangements played a subtle role in comfort. You can feel the difference between sitting near a window, where drafts penetrate, and closer to walls or other children, where warmth accumulates. Some accounts describe children rotating positions during lessons, creating microclimates that allowed the coldest individuals to benefit from residual heat. Experts are divided about how structured these rotations were, yet the practice illustrates ingenuity in adapting to environmental limitations. Lighting was minimal, often limited to small candles or sunlight streaming through tiny windows. You notice the shadows flickering across desks and walls, creating a sense of motion and life even in a static, cold room. Contemporary documents reveal that children quickly learn to orient themselves near the best-lit areas, a practical response that also incidentally placed them closer to potential warmth. Interestingly, some children brought personal items to school to help manage cold, small scraps of cloth, knitted mittens, or even tiny heated stones wrapped in fabric were tucked into desks or pockets. These items were quietly used to preserve heat, demonstrating both resourcefulness and an understanding of physical comfort that complemented their learning environment. It is uncertain how widespread such practices were, but surviving accounts suggest they were recognized and often tolerated by teachers. Movement was part of endurance. You can hear the subtle shift of children leaning, stretching, or tapping feet against the floor to maintain circulation. Some adopted rhythmic motions, quietly bouncing or shifting positions to prevent stiffness. Evidence shows that these small actions were essential for sustaining attention and reducing the discomfort of extended exposure to cold. In some schoolhouses, teachers incorporated the environment into lessons. You notice how a frozen window pane or a drafty corner might become part of an observation exercise in weather, temperature, or measurement. Contemporary sources reveal that children were encouraged to observe these conditions carefully, blending practical knowledge with the demands of survival. Curiously, this interaction between learning and environment may have strengthened children's sensitivity to subtle changes in temperature and texture. Food and drink played a smaller role during school hours. You can sense the faint smell of stale bread or water brought from home, sustaining children without creating excess mess. Or fire hazards. Some accounts indicate that children sipped weak ale or herbal infusions quietly. A subtle strategy to maintain warmth from within. Remains unclear how often such beverages were allowed, yet they provided both physical and psychological comfort. Group dynamics influence survival and learning. You notice children leaning together, sharing small spaces, and occasionally whispering instructions or reassurances. Evidence suggests that these interactions reinforced social bonds, creating a support system that enhanced both endurance and focus. Some children were known to rotate seating or share blankets when available, an adaptive strategy blending community, warmth, and education. Finally, as the lessons conclude and the chill persists, children leave the schoolhouse carrying the tactile and sensory knowledge of endurance. You can feel how layered clothing, huddling, and small improvisation sustain them, creating a continuous adaptation that extends from classroom to home. The interplay of observation, collaboration, and personal ingenuity forms a pattern of resilience, a quiet but essential skill for surviving medieval winter nights. You hear the distant hum of festivities as winter feasts and seasonal celebrations approach. Contemporary accounts reveal that these events offered rare warmth and comfort, contrasting sharply with the long cold nights children endured daily. You can sense the mingling of smells, roasting meats, spiced wine, and baked bread, creating an atmosphere that is both rich and ephemeral. Children, layered in clothing as usual, often pressed close to adults or clustered near the central fire to soak in the limited heat. Records indicate that celebrations followed religious or local calendars, bringing families together in ways that temporarily eased the harsh routines of survival. Surprisingly, some children were allowed to remain awake later than usual, enjoying songs, games, and small treats that broke the monotony of winter chores. You notice the faint sound of laughter, rhythmic clapping, and the occasional jingle of bells, blending with the warmth of proximity and the glow of torches or hearths. Games and play were woven into these gatherings. You might imagine children chasing one another through the hall, stomping feet to warm themselves, or performing simple dances. Evidence shows that such activity was not merely entertainment. Movement helped maintain circulation, subtly counteracting the cold that would otherwise seep into bones. Curiously, older children sometimes created miniature competitions, balancing fun with strategy to preserve limited warmth. Fires burned higher than usual during celebrations. You can feel the gentle radiance against cheeks, the rising heat providing comfort to hands and feet. Contemporary accounts suggest that hosts strategically positioned logs to maximize warmth near seating areas, while peripheral spaces remained colder. Experts are divided over how consistently such methods were applied, yet the effect on children's endurance was significant, offering a temporary reprieve from nightly cold. Food and drink became central to survival and celebration. You notice bowls of porridge, roasted root vegetables, and occasionally sweetmeats or dried fruits. Records reveal that children sometimes received small portions before adults, ensuring their energy and warmth were maintained. Interestingly, the ritual of shared meals reinforced social bonds, providing psychological comfort alongside physical sustenance. Music and storytelling enhanced the experience. You can hear the faint strumming of a lute, soft singing, and recitations of local legends. Contemporary accounts note that stories often included moral lessons or humorous anecdotes, blending amusement with education. Curiously, some tales incorporated winter themes, reinforcing practical strategies for survival or clever adaptations to cold nights. Children listened attentively, absorbing both warmth from the hearth and wisdom from oral tradition. Movement remained essential even during rest periods. You notice children shifting positions, tapping feet or stretching arms, balancing play with circulation. Evidence suggests that these subtle actions helped prevent stiffness and maintained alertness despite extended exposure to cold rooms. Some children also pressed close to pets or younger siblings, maximizing shared warmth through both physical and emotional connection. Rituals of comfort extended beyond warmth. You can feel the texture of soft fabrics used for occasional decoration, smell herbs placed around the hall for aroma and symbolic protection, and observe small charms tucked into pockets or belts. Some children were known to experiment with the placement of these items, finding positions that felt safest or warmest. It remains uncertain how much these practices influenced overall survival, but they reveal the intertwining of imagination and necessity in daily life. Lighting played a subtle role in comfort and celebration. Torches, small candles, and hearth fires created moving shadows that distracted from the chill. Contemporary sources indicate that children gravitated toward areas where light was strongest, gaining warmth, and reassurance simultaneously. You notice the interplay between shadow and glow, how it creates both visual interest and a psychological sense of security. Finally, as the festivities wind down and the night deepens, children settle into layered clothing and straw bedding, carrying warmth from bodies, fires, and fleeting movement. The experience of communal celebration, infused with song, food, and gentle activity, leaves an enduring impression of comfort amid winter's harshness. You can feel the lingering effects, the faint scent of herbs, the soft glow of dying embers, and the subtle pulse of shared warmth as children transition from festivity to rest, prepared to endure the long, cold nights ahead. You notice the bustle of winter markets as children and families prepare for the colder months. Records show that seasonal trading was essential for acquiring warm clothing, including furs, woolen caps, and gloves. You can feel the chill of early evening air as you imagine small hands clutching coins, navigating narrow lanes crowded with vendors. Some children were tasked with carrying purchased items home, carefully balancing parcels while pressing close to adults for warmth. Clothing trade varied by region and availability. Evidence suggests that rural communities relied heavily on local wool and hides, while urban centres offered more variety, including imported fabrics and knitted items. Interestingly, some children developed inventive methods to acquire necessary garments, trading small favours, assisting vendors, or mending older clothes to extend their use. You can almost sense the subtle pride and satisfaction that came with these small achievements, blending practical skill with personal initiative. Markets were sensory-rich environments. You hear the clatter of wooden carts, the murmur of bargaining, and the occasional shout of a vendor advertising goods. The smells of fresh bread, dried herbs, and tanned leather mingle with the crisp winter air. Some children were known to sniff fabrics, assessing softness or warmth, while others inspected seams and thickness, learning the practical qualities of materials through tactile exploration. Experts are divided on how formally these skills were taught, but experiential learning clearly played a central role. Trade extended beyond clothing. Records indicate that children sometimes acquired small objects to aid in warmth, such as straw mats, scraps of cloth, or simple footwear. Curiously, some even bartered toys or personal items for practical necessities, demonstrating both resourcefulness and social negotiation skills. You notice how these exchanges required careful observation, a sense of value, and an awareness of an immediate environmental needs. Weather-influenced shopping strategies. You can feel the crisp air and the occasional flurry of snow as families move through market lanes. Evidence suggests that children learn to prioritize quick transactions, choose sheltered routes, or seek vendors near fires to minimize exposure. Some accounts describe children holding parcels under layered clothing, pressing them close to absorb body heat, a subtle but effective improvisation. Communal knowledge guided market practices. Contemporary sources reveal that experienced older children often mentored younger ones, showing which vendors offered quality goods or which streets were safest in icy conditions. Interestingly, these lessons sometimes included small hacks for warmth, such as wrapping purchased cloth around hands while walking, or creating temporary mittens from scraps. It's uncertain how widespread this informal education was, but it clearly supported both survival and independence. Markets were also spaces of sensory discovery. You can hear the soft rustle of fabric, the tap of coins on counters, and the low hum of conversations. The textures of wool, leather, and linen provide tactile feedback, while aromas of herbs, baked goods, and smoke enhance awareness. Children became adept at interpreting these sensory cues, understanding quality, warmth, and durability through direct experience. Small improvisations were common. Some children tucked extra fabric into shoes or sleeves to create makeshift insulation, while others layered purchased cloth over existing garments. Evidence suggests that such ingenuity was encouraged by necessity, with both adults and older siblings observing, approving, or guiding these practices. These adaptive strategies illustrate a sophisticated understanding of materials, temperature, and spatial awareness. Interestingly, clothing trade often blended with social learning. Children learned local customs, seasonal rhythms, and negotiation skills alongside practical strategies for warmth. Records indicate that knowledge of markets and fabric quality was a valued skill, passed down through observation, instruction, and trial and error. You can feel how these experiences help children navigate both the physical and social landscapes of their communities. Finally, as evening deepens, children return home with purchased or traded items, carrying warmth from bodies, crowds, and freshly acquired materials. You can sense the relief and pride in these small victories. The combination of effort, observation, and ingenuity creating an emotional and practical buffer against winter's harshness. Layered clothing, tactile learning, and resourceful trade work together, preparing children to endure long, freezing nights with resilience and quiet competence. You notice the stark contrast between rural cottages and urban hovels as children move through their environments. Contemporary accounts reveal that rural homes were often small, made of timber or wattle and daub, with straw or rushes for bedding, while city dwellings were tightly packed, sometimes with shared walls and minimal ventilation. You can feel the chill pressing through these structures, the cold intensified by damp stone or poorly insulated timber. Children adapted by layering clothing, huddling with siblings, or seeking warmth near small hearths, making each environment a distinct challenge for survival. Rural children often relied on proximity to animals for warmth. You notice how small barns or pens allowed them to share heat with livestock, while fields and open air provided little protection. Some records indicate that children pressed close to cows or goats at night, drawing comfort from the warmth of fur and body heat. Interestingly, certain practices evolved locally, such as creating insulated corners in barns using straw and cloth, reflecting ingenuity born of necessity. Urban children face different challenges. You can hear the faint clatter of carts, the murmur of neighbours, and the distant barking of dogs as they navigate crowded streets. Evidence shows that narrow alleys and shared living spaces increased exposure to drafts and cold floors. Some children improvise by huddling in doorways, crouching near embers from communal fires, or sharing heated stones passed among friends. It is uncertain how consistently these practices were employed, yet repeated accounts demonstrate creativity and adaptation in urban settings. Sanitation and hygiene impacted endurance. You notice the mingling smells of damp clothing, unwashed bodies, and straw bedding. Contemporary sources suggest that children developed awareness of clean, dry areas to sleep or rest, sometimes creating makeshift barriers with cloth or straw. Curiously, some children marked preferred spots with small tokens or scraps of fabric, ensuring that personal space and warmth were maximized. The exact prevalence of this behavior is unclear, but it highlights an intuitive understanding of comfort and survival. Community networks were critical in cities. Evidence indicates that children often relied on neighbors or older companions to share warmth, watch for hazards, or pass along advice for enduring cold. You can feel the subtle reliance on social cohesion, the way small acts of care or shared body heat enhanced survival chances. Accounts vary, but it is clear that collaboration and observation were essential for navigating both physical and social environments. Rural and urban routines also shaped daily adaptation. You notice how tasks such as collecting water, tending animals, or performing chores influence timing and clothing choices. Records reveal that children develop strategies tailored to their environment, such as timing work to coincide with warmer parts of the day or layering garments differently for outdoor versus indoor activity. Experts are divided on how systematically these routines were taught, yet evidence suggests that practical experience and imitation were the primary methods of instruction. Children's play reflected environmental differences. In rural areas, movement across open fields or snow provided warmth through exertion, while urban children often created small games within cramped spaces, hopping, shuffling, or stamping to maintain circulation. Interestingly, some games doubled as learning opportunities, teaching children spatial awareness, coordination, and cooperation under cold conditions. The combination of exercise and interaction reinforced both survival skills and social bonds. Objects and clothing adapted to specific settings. You can notice how rural children layered furs and straw for insulation, while urban children relied on dense wool, patched clothing, and communal sharing. Evidence suggests that children were inventive, sometimes tying fabric in novel ways or pressing it against walls to trap warmth. It remains uncertain how uniform these practices were, but the ingenuity is clear across both rural and urban contexts. Survival strategies extended beyond immediate warmth. Children in both settings developed routines for preparation and anticipation. You notice small rituals, like arranging bedding, tucking scraps into clothing, or pressing hands and feet together before nightfall. Some accounts reveal subtle differences between regions. Rural children incorporated animals and straw, while urban children emphasize shared space and inventive layering. Contemporary observations emphasize that the principles of observation, adaptation, and anticipation were universal, even if the materials varied. Finally, as evening settles, children return to sleeping areas, adjusted and prepared for the night ahead. You can feel the combination of layered clothing, huddling, and learned strategies creating microclimates that sustain warmth despite harsh conditions. The contrast between rural and urban survival strategies illustrates the adaptability of children, showing how ingenuity, observation, and social cooperation allowed them to endure cold nights, regardless of their environment. You notice the faint, pungent scent of dried herbs as children prepare for the night. Evidence suggests that families use simple herbal remedies to provide warmth and comfort, often placing sage, thyme, or rosemary near sleeping areas. You can feel the rough texture of dried leaves beneath small fingers, a tactile reminder of both practicality and care. Surprisingly, some children tucked tiny bundles into clothing folds, believing that the scent itself could chase away cold or protect against illness. Children learned to use these materials creatively. Records indicate that leaves were sometimes spread under rushes or layered over straw to create pockets of insulation. You can sense how shifting positions over these herbs would redistribute warmth and comfort. Combining both sensory and practical advantages, experts are divided over whether these strategies were standard practice or varied greatly by household, but the ingenuity is evident in the surviving discretion. Some remedies involved aromatic teas or infusions. Contemporary accounts reveal that children were sometimes given weak chamomile or mint teas before bedtime, providing both hydration and a subtle warming effect. Curiously, a few families experimented by placing heated stones near teapots, allowing gentle radiating warmth to extend further into sleeping spaces. You can almost feel the heat rising slowly, blending with layered clothing and huddled bodies. The tactile qualities of herbs were also appreciated. You notice the gentle brush of dried leaves against skin or fabric, and the faint crackle when leaves are crushed for aroma. Documents indicate that children learned to judge which herbs were soft enough to lie upon, or sturdy enough to block drafts. Interestingly, these small acts required observation and subtle dexterity, a skill cultivated through repeated experience rather than formal instruction. Some families combined herbal use with body heat. You can sense children pressing small sachets against extremities or tucking bundles near the chest, enhancing warmth through direct contact. Evidence suggests that these practices were passed down orally, with older siblings guiding younger ones through trial and error. There is ongoing discussion about the extent to which herbal placement influenced actual temperature versus perceived comfort, but both factors likely played a role in endurance. Nighttime rituals often incorporated sound as well as smell. You notice soft murmurs or gentle humming accompanying the placement of herbs, a practice that comforted both child and caregiver. Contemporary accounts reveal that children sometimes repeated small phrases or gestures, embedding psychological reassurance alongside physical adaptation. Curiously, this combination of scent, touch, and quiet sound created a multisensory approach to survival. Children were sometimes known to improvise with what they had on hand. You might imagine a strip of cloth filled with dried herbs, folded into a makeshift pouch to press against cold hands or feet. Records show that such inventive solutions were widely tolerated and encouraged, blending necessity with creative problem-solving. Experts are divided over how widespread these individual improvisations were, but surviving examples highlight adaptability and attentiveness. Certain herbs had symbolic as well as practical purposes. Evidence suggests that rosemary or thyme were thought to ward off evil spirits or bad luck. In addition to providing subtle warmth, you can feel the combination of belief and observation guiding placement, with children carefully positioning sachets under bedding or within clothing folds. Interestingly, these small gestures reveal the interplay of imagination, culture, and survival in everyday life. The sensory environment created by herbs was complex. You notice the mingling of smells from multiple plants, the faint crackle of dried leaves under small movements, and the soft rustle of fabric adjusting around them. Contemporary sources reveal that children quickly learn to interpret these cues, moving or adjusting positions to maximize comfort. Accounts differ on how much guidance was provided versus instinctive adaptation, but the outcomes were similar: improved warmth, reassurance, and continuity of nightly routine. Finally, as the night deepens, the combination of layered clothing, huddled bodies, and aromatic herbs creates a subtle, persistent warmth. You can feel the comforting presence of these tactile, olfactory, and social elements, all working together to help children endure the long, cold hours. Children internalize these lessons over time, blending observation, experimentation, and inherited knowledge, ensuring that both practical and psychological strategies support survival through medieval winter nights. You notice the soft stir of animals moving nearby as children curl into straw bedding for warmth. Contemporary accounts reveal that pets and barn animals often provided essential heat, their fur pressed against small bodies, offering comfort that blankets or clothing could not fully replace. You can feel the subtle warmth radiating from a cat curled at a child's feet or a dog nestled along a sibling's side. Surprisingly, children sometimes learn to position animals deliberately to maximize shared warmth, a practical instinct reinforced through repeated experience. Some households incorporated animals into nightly routines intentionally. Evidence suggests that cats and small dogs were allowed into sleeping areas or small pens, providing both companionship and heat. You notice how children might adjust positions, sliding a paw or back closer to capture warmth, while the animals settled in predictable patterns. Experts are divided over whether this practice was universal or limited to specific regions, yet it clearly enhanced comfort for those who had access. Children often adapted tactile strategies using animals. Contemporary accounts show that small pets were sometimes placed under blankets or pressed gently against extremities. You can feel the subtle difference in temperature, the warmth traveling slowly through fur to skin, creating a small, localized heat source. Curiously, some children even use the animal's natural body heat to dry damp hands or feet, a practical and resourceful technique in cold conditions. Animals also contributed to psychological comfort. You notice the gentle rhythm of breathing, the faint sounds of purring or the soft shuffle of fur against clothing. Records indicate that children were soothed by these subtle cues, reducing anxiety about cold or darkness. Some evidence suggests that even the scent of familiar animals created reassurance, a comforting presence that accompanied warmth physically and emotionally. Sleeping arrangements with animals required subtle negotiation. You can feel the careful positioning, the way children and pets shift to avoid discomfort while preserving warmth. Documents reveal that older siblings often guided younger ones, ensuring that animals were placed optimally to maximize benefit. Surprisingly, some children memorized routines for adjusting both human and animal positions throughout the night. A tacit understanding of thermal management and spatial organization, movement remained an integral part of maintaining warmth. Contemporary accounts describe children gently nudging animals or adjusting their own posture to redistribute heat. You can sense the rhythm of these small motions, the way bodies, animals, and layered clothing interact to sustain temperature. Experts are divided on whether these movements were conscious strategies or instinctive responses, yet the outcomes consistently enhanced comfort. Animals could also serve as early warning systems. Evidence suggests that pets sometimes responded to sudden drafts, cold spots, or environmental changes, prompting children to shift positions or add layers. You notice how a subtle nuzzle or stir might signal attention, creating an unspoken form of communication that blended survival, companionship, and adaptation. Curiously, some families even placed animals strategically near windows or doorways to monitor the cold, merging instinct with practical household management. The sensory environment of animal companionship is layered. You can feel warmth radiating through fur, hear quiet rustling, and smell the distinct scent of animals mingling with straw and clothing. Records indicate that these combined cues provided both physical and emotional insulation, reinforcing the sense of security that helped children sleep despite harsh temperatures. Children were sometimes known to develop unique rituals involving animals. You might imagine a small hand stroking a cat's back, whispering a reassuring phrase, or adjusting a dog's position to maintain contact. Evidence shows that these personal strategies varied widely, reflecting both creativity and attentiveness. Experts are divided on how widespread or formalized such behaviors were, yet they illustrate the intimate relationship between children and animals as part of nightly survival. Finally, as the night deepens and the household grows quiet, animals and children create a shared microclimate of warmth. You can sense the pulse of life, the subtle heat radiating from layered bodies, the tactile presence of fur, and the quiet rhythm of breathing. Together, these elements form an interconnected system of comfort, protection, and resilience. showing how medieval children creatively incorporated living companions into strategies for enduring cold winter nights. You notice children laughing quietly through the cold as you imagine them at play, their breath visible in the crisp night air. Evidence suggests that play was not only a source of enjoyment but a subtle way to generate warmth and maintain circulation. You can feel the rhythm of movement, jumping, stamping feet, and shifting positions to stave off chill. Surprisingly, even small games, like tossing pebbles or chasing shadows, provided both exercise and a distraction from discomfort, blending survival with amusement. Children often invented their own games. Contemporary accounts reveal that they would improvise with scraps of cloth, sticks, or small balls of straw, turning mundane objects into playful tools. Curiously, these activities sometimes incorporated elements of competition, helping children remain alert while reinforcing social bonds. You can sense the faint rush of excitement and the warmth generated from vigorous movement against the backdrop of cold, layered clothing. Shared play created microclimates of warmth. You notice how children huddled together during games, pressing shoulders and entwining hands to preserve heat. Records indicate that older siblings often led games, subtly directing positions and movements to ensure that even the smallest participants gained the most warmth possible. Experts are divided on whether this guidance was deliberate or simply instinctive, but the coordination demonstrates both ingenuity and communal care. Play also helped children cope with long nights. You can hear whispers, giggles, and soft steps blending with the sounds of settling straw and faint rustles of layered clothing. Some accounts describe children using imaginative storytelling during games, integrating elements of local legends, spirits, or animals. Interestingly, this creative engagement not only provided mental comfort but reinforced strategies for endurance, encouraging alertness and flexibility in movement. Some routines combined exercise with ritual. Evidence shows that children might stomp lightly in rhythmic patterns, spin in small circles, or clap hands to keep warm. You can feel the subtle increase in body heat, the way movement distributes warmth through limbs and extremities. Contemporary sources reveal that such repetitive motions became habitual, an intuitive adaptation appeared in daily winter survival practices. Clothing and layering influenced play. You notice children adjusting garments as they moved, pulling sleeves tighter or tucking stray edges into belts to prevent drafts. Documents indicate that they learned over time how to balance freedom of movement with insulation, combining agility and warmth in a subtle art of adaptation. Curiously, some children would rearrange clothing mid-play, experimenting with positions and folds to maximize heat while remaining agile. Animals sometimes joined in. You can feel the faint nudge of a cat weaving between feet or a small dog chasing a moving child, adding both warmth and amusement. Records show that children intuitively incorporated these companions, enhancing both tactile comfort and engagement. Experts are divided on how commonly animals participated in such play, but their presence created an additional layer of warmth and companionship. Environmental awareness shaped games. You notice children avoiding icy patches or using slightly elevated areas to leap and stamp safely. Evidence suggests that even during play, children remained alert to hazards, combining physical skill with subtle survival strategies. Interestingly, some children use small snow mounds or natural depressions as obstacles, integrating terrain into both amusement and practical learning about cold and surface conditions. Play encouraged mental resilience as well. Contemporary accounts indicate that imaginative engagement allowed children to forget, temporarily, the starkness of winter nights. You can feel how laughter, concentration, and creative movement together create psychological warmth that complements physical strategies. Some children were known to invent small competitions, quietly gauging endurance and cleverness while remaining engaged in subtle communal exercises. Finally, as activity slows and night deepens, the warmth generated from movement, touch, and laughter persists. You notice children gradually curling into huddled positions, bodies carrying residual heat from play, layered clothing, and tactile contact. The combination of exercise, improvisation, and social interaction forms a multi-layered approach to enduring cold nights, illustrating how creativity, collaboration, and energy management were essential parts of medieval childhood survival. You feel the subtle uncertainty of medieval nights as you imagine children navigating the extremes of cold and scarcity. Contemporary records reveal that survival varied widely, with some children thriving while others succumbed to harsh conditions. You notice the faint, uneven warmth in layers of clothing, straw bedding, and shared bodies, a fragile buffer against frost. Surprisingly, small adjustments, tucking a sleeve, or rearranging straw, or curling slightly differently could mean the difference between enduring the night or shivering helplessly. The reasons for these differences remain partly mysterious. Some sources suggest that local climate, household resources, and family knowledge played decisive roles, while others emphasize innate resilience or adaptive ingenuity. You can feel the tension between these factors as children navigate their environment, responding to subtle cues from clothing, bedding, and human proximity. It remains unclear if children learned these survival strategies entirely from observation, trial and error, or a combination of both. Daily routines contributed significantly to endurance. Records indicate that children followed a careful rhythm of chores, meals, and preparation for sleep, a pattern that optimized warmth and comfort. You notice the intricate coordination required: clothing layers adjusted, bedding arranged, and siblings positioned strategically. Curiously, children sometimes develop personal routines, such as pressing hands between layers or using pets for additional warmth, creating individualized systems of survival. The impact of communal strategies is evident. Evidence shows that huddling, shared bedding, and coordinated movements were central to mitigating cold. You can feel the subtle pulse of heat traveling between bodies, reinforced by tactile awareness and repeated practice. Experts are divided over how consciously children coordinated these efforts, but the outcomes were consistently beneficial. Imagination played a surprisingly important role. Contemporary accounts suggest that storytelling, whispered games, or mental visualization helped children endure discomfort. You notice how focus on narrative or play diverted attention from cold, enhancing both psychological and physical endurance. Interestingly, these mental strategies often complemented practical measures, allowing children to maintain energy and alertness while conserving warmth. Some families combined practical adaptations with symbolic measures. Records indicate that charms, herbs, or small ritual objects were used alongside layered clothing and bedding. You can sense the dual function of these items, providing both physical insulation and psychological reassurance. Some children develop their own interpretations of these objects, arranging them in ways that made intuitive sense, blending inherited knowledge with personal innovation. The variability of survival prompts reflection. You can feel how subtle differences in positioning, clothing, or attention to small details affected outcomes. Experts are divided on the extent to which genetic factors, household care, or environmental adaptation influenced resilience. Contemporary descriptions hint at a combination, emphasizing both learned behaviors and situational advantages. Environmental awareness was central to coping. You notice children responding to drafts, damp spots, and subtle temperature changes, shifting positions or adjusting layers instinctively. Evidence suggests that these responses were honed over repeated experience, forming a tacit understanding of how to optimize warmth. Curiously, children sometimes experimented with minor variations, discovering effective strategies independently of adults. Resourcefulness extended to objects and spaces. Records reveal that small scraps of cloth, portions of straw, or household tools were repurposed creatively to maximize comfort. You can sense the concentration and care required to implement these strategies, a blend of problem-solving and learned practice. Interestingly, even minor innovations could have a significant impact, demonstrating how ingenuity complemented endurance. Finally, as night deepens and silence settles, the cumulative effect of layered clothing, huddling, careful observation, and imaginative engagement forms a resilient system. You feel the subtle warmth created by these intertwined strategies, a testament to adaptation, collaboration, and ingenuity. Even amid uncertainty and harsh conditions, children develop a quiet mastery of endurance, illustrating the delicate balance between human creativity, social bonds, and environmental awareness. You notice the soft hush settling over the household as night deepens, the air thick with the combined warmth of layered clothing, straw bedding, and bodies pressed close together. Contemporary accounts reveal that medieval children often relied on these subtle strategies to endure the long hours of cold that stretched through winter nights. You can feel the gentle heat radiating from huddled siblings, the faint rustle of clothing as small adjustments are made, and the reassuring presence of family or companions. Surprisingly, even minor touches, a nudge, or the press of a hand against a shoulder can generate a sense of warmth that transcends mere physical comfort. Nighttime routines culminated in careful arrangements of bedding and clothing. Evidence suggests that children instinctively position themselves to maximize shared warmth, pressing into corners, layering scraps, and curling in ways that conserved heat. You can sense the rhythm of breath, the rise and fall of shoulders, and the subtle weight of bodies aligning with one another, a living choreography honed through experience. Some children were known to shift repeatedly throughout the night, responding to drafts and creaking timber and the faint movement of siblings. It is uncertain whether these adjustments were instinctive or guided by past instruction, but both factors likely contributed to effective survival. Small rituals persisted alongside practical measures. Contemporary sources reveal that children sometimes whispered softly, hummed familiar tunes, or held talismans and herbs, blending psychological comfort with physical strategies. You can feel the reassurance provided by these rituals, a subtle emotional warmth that reinforces endurance and a sense of security. Curiously, these habits often became deeply ingrained, repeated night after night, shaping resilience and imagination. Animals contributed quietly to the microclimate of warmth. You can sense the gentle weight of a small cat curled near feet or a dog pressed alongside a child, its fur radiating subtle heat. Records indicate that children learned to incorporate these companions thoughtfully, arranging positions to maximize contact and comfort. Some sources suggest that pets also provided an early warning against drafts or intrusions, further integrating sensory awareness into survival practices. The room itself seems to be doomed to breathe with the night. You notice the faint creak of beams as they settle, the whisper of wind through gaps in walls, and the subtle shifting of straw beneath bodies. Evidence shows that children became finely attuned to these environmental cues, adjusting positions and layering clothing in response to changes in temperature or draft. Interestingly, these adjustments required a combination of observation, intuition, and prior experience, reflecting an early and practical understanding of environmental management. Shared meals, layered clothing, huddling, and playful strategies all contributed to resilience. Contemporary accounts suggest that these elements formed an interconnected system where practical, social, and imaginative methods reinforced each other. You can feel the subtle interplay between tactile comfort, psychological reassurance, and rhythmic body heat, a complex system that sustained children throughout harsh nights. Experts are divided on which factors were most influential, but the combination clearly enhanced survival and comfort. Even small details had significance. You notice the placement of a scrap of cloth over feet, the tucking of a sleeve for warmth, or the adjustment of a sibling's posture to share heat. Records indicate that children developed remarkable attention to such details, often improvising solutions and learning from observation. Curiously, these minor adjustments became habitual, a form of embodied knowledge that shaped both physical endurance and social cooperation. Movement and sensation continued subtly through the night. You can sense the quiet shifting of bodies, the gentle pulse of warmth through contact, and the rhythmic sounds of breath and fabric. Evidence suggests that these motions, though small, contributed to maintaining circulation and distributing heat evenly. Some children incorporated playful elements into these adjustments, blending comfort with engagement and further reinforcing resilience. Finally, as sleep deepens, a calm settles over the household. You notice the lingering warmth from layered clothing, straw bedding, huddled bodies, animals, and residual heat from brief activities or rituals. Contemporary accounts reveal that this combination of strategies allowed children to survive long, cold nights with a blend of endurance, creativity, and shared experience. You can feel the gentle rhythm of warmth and reassurance, the subtle pulse of life continuing quietly through the night. Night drifts toward early morning, and the household exhales in unison. The chill remains outside, but inside, layers of adaptation, observation, and communal care provide a cocoon of comfort. You notice the final touches of routine, a hand pressed over a sibling's back, a whispered word of reassurance, the soft rustle of clothing as bodies settle fully into sleep. Curiously, these small practices are as important as fire or blankets, demonstrating how human ingenuity and care sustain life under harsh conditions. In this serene moment, you can reflect on the blend of sensory awareness, social cooperation, improvisation, and ritual that defined medieval childhood. You feel the warmth not just in body, but in the mind and spirit, a quiet testament to resilience, adaptation, and shared humanity. The night stretches peacefully, a calm rhythm that guides both body and imagination into rest. Finally, as your breathing slows and your thoughts drift, you notice the subtle magic of continuity, generations of children learning, observing, and enduring, the touch of layered clothing, the warmth of huddled bodies, the faint scent of straw and herbs, and the comforting presence of companions all converge, leaving a soft, enduring sense of safety and calm. You are immersed in the quiet artistry of survival, where even the harshest nights are met with creativity, attentiveness, and care. Sleep well,